Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Refugee Welcome Collective Lunch and Learn series. In these sessions, we aim to bring interesting and timely information to you, supporters of refugees. Whether you're a volunteer, community sponsor, resettlement agency staff, a local advocate, or just someone who's interested in learning more. We hope that you enjoy today's session. Community support and empowerment, and an approach to addressing power differences, inclusion, respecting self-agency, and choice. Refugee Welcome Collective collaborates with partners to provide in-depth training programs, weekly learning sessions, resources, and on-demand technical assistance for sponsors, practitioners at resettlement agencies, refugees paired with sponsors, community and institutional partners, and others to support quality community sponsorship programs across the United States. Please go to the next slide. As a reminder for everyone joining the call today, there is a control panel in your upper right-hand corner that will allow you to submit questions through the questions box. Again, the questions box, not the chat, please. There will be ample time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. Everyone on today's webinar is automatically muted. However, if you have any technical issues, please raise your hand through the control panel or submit a question in the questions box so we can try to assist you. Additionally, the presentation, any resources, and a recording will be sent to everyone following today's webinar. Which brings us to our presenters for today. Ariel Reynoso, Volunteer Coordination Associate with CWS, and myself. My name is Derek Feldman. I am a Senior Community Sponsorship Technical Assistance Associate with Refugee Welcome Collective. Go ahead to the next slide, and I will let Ariel take it from there.
Thank you so much, Derek. So this is just sort of a layout of the topics that we'll be covering today. Integration, then we'll move to power dynamics, diversity and cultural humility, self-agency and choice, have some time for self-reflections, and then jump to the Q&A. Next slide. Okay, so firstly, we're going to talk about one of the more commonly referenced terms used in refugee resettlement, which is integration. What it is, what it is not, and some additional considerations. So there are several different perspectives, frameworks, and definitions, but here I'll just share a couple from the Western perspective, including the definition used by us here at Church World Service. So integration is a reciprocal process through which refugees and immigrants and their host communities are each changed and enriched by one another and find a mutual sense of belonging. Integration requires neither party to give up their history, culture or identity, but to respect one another. And then I also included another one here from grant makers concerned with refugees and immigrants. Gcir defines immigrant integration as a dynamic, two-way process in which newcomers and the receiving society work together to build secure, vibrant, and cohesive communities. We utilize the term integration rather than assimilation to emphasize respect for and incorporation of differences, and the importance of mutual adaptation and an appreciation of diversity. So what both of these definitions really have in common is that integration is respect for diversity, differences in individual history and culture, and that integration is a two-way process and a partnership between refugees and the new communities. So integrating refugees in this definition really goes beyond ensuring that those are provided with basic needs and access to services. It really requires that the receiving community create a welcoming environment which supports refugees to achieve long-term economic stability and adjust to a new society, and really including and fostering a sense of belonging and encouraging participation in their new communities. Next slide. So that is what integration in our eyes is. We'll talk a little bit now about what integration is not. So I found this definition or this quote here by the Journal of Refugee Studies, which is integration is a chaotic topic, a word used by many and understood differently by most, and is often individualized, contested, and contextual. So by this quote, I think this kind of summarizes what we see in a lot of work directly with refugee and immigrant clients, is that there really is no exact measurement to determine at what point a newcomer is really fully integrated. Integration occurs within a specific cultural context, social and economic environment, and this really varies widely among refugee resettlement and depending on location and their environment. Integration is really multidimensional, social, cultural, political, really relates to identity and economics, and then really meaning that due to its nature, a lot of immigrants might be considered integrated in some dimensions, but often excluded in others. So this includes those who might have barriers to full participation in program services such as women, children, people with disabilities, medical conditions, mental health challenges, elderly, LGBTQ, those individuals. And additionally, when working with immigrants of color, recognizing that we are serving individuals within systems that we know are structurally and systematically racist. So for example, housing, healthcare, education, employment, hiring practices, and so on. So with all of this in mind, it's important to hear, learn, and to listen to those with different perspectives on integration and to reflect on what integration means to you and what it means to the individuals that you might be working with. So kind of shifting to more centering your work as partners with newcomers and families as opposed to sponsors to really level the potential power imbalance. I'll now pass it over to Derek to chat more about power dynamics.
Thank you, Ariel. Yeah, I want to first, in talking about power and privilege, to kind of address some of the assumptions that I come to this work with. And so that's what I'm going to try to share with you. That first assumption is that there is an inherent power difference between community sponsor group or volunteer and the client. We'll talk a little bit more about exactly what that means or what that looks like or how that sort of plays out, but that there is an inherent power difference in that relationship. And then we'll work on that. Number two, this relationship between community sponsor group and or volunteer and client is not happening in some vacuum. This welcoming and resettlement is not happening in a vacuum. It's happening within larger other intersectional systems of power and privilege. It occurs for both volunteers and clients. And then third, my assumption is that it is beneficial for everyone to be more aware of these factors and to work towards change. Let's go to the next slide, please. Let's talk about, in that relationship between community sponsor groups, support teams, volunteers working with refugee clients, some possible power dynamics in that relationship, how it plays out. So number one, volunteers are giving money. They're giving donated items, couches and beds. They are giving of their time. They're giving service to the clients, especially in the beginning during that first, 90-day resettlement period, right? It is an inherently imbalanced relationship. It is one person or multiple people doing for clients. That money may be, that client may depend on that direct financial support They may depend on those all of the furniture because it saves them money to be able to be given these things. Again, time, the service that you're providing. It's a one-way street. Now, that's not to say that community partners and volunteers don't get something back in that service. Of course, we all kind of believe that, whether it's a good feeling, an exposure to diversity and to other people's culture and language, and just camaraderie and friendship and that kind of thing. Certainly, we get something out of that. But the dynamics of that relationship are one way primarily. And so recognizing our place in that, and then recognizing that really we want to work towards long-term moving from more of a volunteer or welcomer to more of a friend and neighbor, where it sort of equals out over the long term, after someone has become more familiar with their living situation and their life here. So just being aware of that. Number two, the oftentimes, especially in the beginning, a client doesn't come here with a vehicle or driver's license or sometimes, easy access to transportation. That is reported over and over again for clients to say how important that ability to do what they want to do when they want to do it. When do they want to go grocery shopping? When do they want to go to the store to get clothes? Whatever it may be, that freedom is restricted. Their choices are restricted and sometimes are dependent upon that volunteer or community sponsored group to provide that transportation, to teach them how to utilize public transportation. And so that's an extremely important, again, power dynamic to be aware of. And then again, how do we work from doing for someone to teaching them how to be able to do it for themselves? So in the short term, you might very well need to, especially in the beginning, do for because something needs to be done, because it's time sensitive. But while it might be easier to just do it for someone, whether it's just driving them somewhere, it's so much more important to teach someone how to be able to access that public transportation so that they have the freedom to make their own choices about what they want to do next. And then third, just the water that we are all swimming in all the time of language and cultural familiarity, right? Many of us who have done this work recognize just how difficult it is to navigate these healthcare systems and public benefit systems and the DMV and those kinds of things. And we many of us speak English, as our native language, and we're familiar with American, customs and things like that. And we know just how difficult it can be for us. We can also imagine just how difficult it is when you don't know the language and you can't read the signs to where you're supposed to go. When you try to call and the person doesn't speak your language, and you even try to get an interpreter, but they don't even understand what you're asking for, or they haven't set up a system where they have an interpreter easily available. So these kinds of things, and again, recognize our own power and privilege in this relationship, in this work of welcoming, and then work to be aware of that, and then work on how can you change the system. So we'll talk a little bit more of that. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Again, this is being done, this relationship, this welcome is being done not in a vacuum, but within these larger structures that are occurring at the same time. So, and I'm not going to go into every single detail of each one of these, although each one is worth its own kind of talk and presentation, I think. But think about the colonial history of Africa and South America and North America. Think about the economic system that's in place, whether there are support systems, safety net systems in place. Recognize your place in sort of class system. As most volunteers, it's a privilege to be able to volunteer, to not have to work, at least, you know, not have to work all the time just to make ends meet. You have that extra time to be able to give of service to someone else. How race clearly, you know, affects different people's experience here in the United States. We talk about at a previous resettlement agency, just thinking about some of our clients and how they experience something like, for example, interactions with police, for our Congolese clients, and how they might experience that differently than our Ukrainian clients here in the United States, how those systems play. There are many different examples, of course. Same with sex and gender, how men and women may experience their lives here. Us as volunteers, clients as clients, religion, language, culture, immigration status, again, all of these, heterosexism and ableism. Recognizing the privileges that we may experience in the system, then, you know, please go to the next slide. So now what? So you're aware of these things. What is that? What do you do with that information? I think many of us sometimes feel overwhelmed by that. Okay, yes, I sort of generally get the sense. I may experience my own place in this, but then what do I do? So one suggestion is to just first be aware of your own privilege. 2, are there opportunities for you to use that privilege to help others navigate and change systems? So for example, if you know that dealing with the medical profession here in the United States, you have an easier access to be able to make sure that someone calls you back, or that they'll see you at the time that you're there, that you can communicate clearly with them what your needs are. That is to some extent what we are doing as welcomers, as community sponsored groups, as volunteers working with clients, to sort of position ourselves to be able to help our clients, the people that we're working with, navigate the system better. So, you know, so you use that if you can, but also help others become aware of their own privilege and hopefully change those systems. You know, that is some of the kind of big picture work that I think that can be beneficial to becoming a co-sponsored group or a volunteer working in resettlement. People that perhaps had never used their own public transportation, they never had to, now are trying to learn so that they can teach clients how to use it. What do we learn in that process, and how can we influence and help change the system for everyone, for refugees, of course, but for everyone in our community? That's, you know, I often also talk about, you know, welcome teams and co-sponsored groups and volunteers doing this. Oftentimes, these are the people who are friends with a city council member. So, you know, the mayor's spouse goes to church with you. I mean, you know, we have connections and influence in our community that we can influence for good. We can move the needle as best we can altogether. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on. Could you please go to the next slide? And I think Ariel's going to take it from here as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Derek. So now we're going to talk a little bit about diversity and cultural humility. Cultural humility is a dynamic and lifelong process focusing on self-reflection, personal critique, acknowledging one's own biases, and it recognizes the shifting culture of intersecting identities and encourages ongoing curiosity rather than an endpoint. So cultural humility as a term was introduced in 1998 as a dynamic and lifelong process, really of kind of checking, as Derek mentioned, your own privileges as well as your own biases. It really involves understanding the complexity of identities and even in sameness and similarities, and that if there is any differences. And so you will never really have a full understanding about others until you really begin to self-reflect and understand your experiences and really understand others' experiences as well. So cultural humility means really opening up a conversation in a way that genuinely attempts to understand a person's identities related to race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, social needs, and others. And awareness of understanding yourself is really central to cultural humility, and who a person is informs how they see another. Awareness can stem from self-reflective questions such as what parts of my identity am I aware of? What parts of my identity are privileged or marginalized? How does my shift based on context and settings? And what parts onto which people project? And what might be some of my own blind spots and biases? So given the complexity of multiculturalism, it's important and beneficial to understand cultural competency as a process rather than an end product. So constantly engaging and learning. And from this perspective, competency involves more than gaining factual knowledge. It also includes our ongoing attitudes towards both the refugee and immigrant clients that you're serving and ourselves. So as I've connected with many volunteers in the past, there are those who really kind of go in and do research to understand background about certain individuals and families and where they're coming from, and really doing their own factual research about cultural norms. But it's also important to remember that cultures and identities are not a monolith. So every person's experience is different. So there are three factors to cultural humility. The first is that this is really a lifelong commitment to self-evaluation and self-critique. So we are really never finished, and we don't arrive at a point where we are done learning. So it's important to go into this process with humility, to be flexible and bold enough to look at ourselves critically and desire to learn more. So when we don't know something, are we able to say that we don't know? So it's a willingness to act on the acknowledgement that we have not and will not arrive at sort of that finish line where you have a full understanding of others. And that's an important aspect of cultural humility as well. So understanding is really only as powerful as the action that follows. The second is that cultural humility includes aspiring to develop partnerships with people and groups who advocate for others. So through, though individuals can create really positive change, communities and groups can also have a profound impact on systems. So as Derek mentioned, as a volunteer, you might go to church with someone who might be in a position of power, and you might have a friend who is in a leadership role or at a company or organization. So by making those connections and realizing that we cannot fully commit to self-evaluation and fixing power imbalances without advocating within the larger organizations and systems in which we participate. Lastly, cultural humility is the desire to fix those power imbalances where really none should exist. So recognizing that each person brings something different to the table, and that helps us to really see the value in each person. So while creating goals with refugee and immigrant clients, recognizing that each client is an expert on his or their own life, their own decisions, and they know their own decisions, and they know their own strengths. So you as a volunteer or service provider do hold a body of knowledge that the client does not have. However, the client also has an understanding of the outside scope of the provider. So partnership is really key in collaborating and learning from each other for the best outcomes. Which leads me to our next topic, which is self-agency and choice, and I'll pass it back to Derek.
Thank you, Ariel. There's a fantastic sort of transition that, the clients are the experts of their own lives. They will make decisions that are best for themselves and their families. And so it really comes down to respecting that self-agency and choice. Self-agency being refers to a person's willingness and ability to make self-generated decisions and actions. Please go to the next slide. Our job as community sponsors and volunteers is not to make choices for the refugee client that we're working with. What our job is to lay out those choices and to inform clients of possible consequences, but ultimately we need to respect people to make their own choices that they believe are best for themselves and their family. What I talk about with community sponsored groups and volunteers and anyone else I can have listen to me, I encourage people to think about the fact that in all likelihood, expect to have times where a client makes a decision that you personally disagree with. You would have chosen something else. And it will be something that you feel strongly about. And I will give you, let's walk through kind of an example. I'd like to walk through an example with you. For example, please, sort of imagine a mom with two young kids. They are not quite in school yet. And as well as a young adult, let's say daughter, who is 18 years old, and they just arrived here. The choice for this young adult, this 18-year-old, is to decide whether they're going to go to high school or go to work. They're 18, so they can go to work full-time, or they could go to school, they could go to high school. And I want you to think about, what would you want? What do you want? What do you want for yourself? What would you want for your family? What would be important to you? Because you need to recognize what you really think and feel. Because if you don't, I would argue that you are likely going to try to over-influence the client with what it is that you actually do think and believe. If you're not aware of your own thoughts, we tend to sort of push it on to everyone else. So first I would say, what are your assumptions about the importance of school and that kind of experience versus work? Do you lean towards, I really want her to go to school and make friends and find some, fun experiences and try band and try basketball and try art and, have these cool, fun experiences and have friends and, make mistakes and learn from them and do that, and maybe they find out that they really excel at something and then go on to college, focus on that thing that they really want to do. So maybe that's where you think everyone should want to do that. That's what you would want for your own 18-year-old. Or maybe you lean more towards, yeah, but somebody's got to pay the rent. And what's going to happen if mom needs to take care of the younger kids and can't really work, and this 18-year-old's really the only one in the family that that could work a full-time job and have enough money to support the family right now. I want you to think about this example, and I want you to think about and recognize your own thoughts, but then I want us to realize that it is not our choice. It is not up to us to make this decision. It is the family's decision to make. And it is totally okay and reasonable to lay out what those choices are and what the consequences of, if you chose this path, here are some potential risks, here are some of the potential great things that could happen. If you choose this, here are the potential risks. You'll miss out on all the fun things, but you'll be able to pay the rent, that kind of thing. So lay those choices out clearly, but honestly, not try to, strongly encourage or force someone to make the decision that you think is best. And what I just say with people is expect there to be at least one, probably more than one, times where the client will make a decision that you personally disagree with, and that we need to acknowledge and support their choices for themselves, because in the end, it is their responsibility, and they are capable of making those choices for themselves, that they believe within the context of their lives, this is the right decision for them right now. So there are many examples of this. I just wanted to give one example because I know I've seen this example play out numerous times. And there is no right or wrong answer to that, really. I mean, I can see both sides of it. I really can. I may have a personal feeling about, I really want, them to explore, this learning in an environment, and to see what potential possibilities are out there, and to experience all that. That may be my preference. But I also recognize, as Ariel was talking about, sort of having some cultural humility, recognizing, and also just my place and my own experience of privilege in this society, that I can do that. I feel, comfortable that with my daughter, who's not quite 18 yet, thank goodness, that is what I would want for her. But this is my life and my experience leading up to it. Our clients may have a different one, and to truly, really respect their decisions for that. So go ahead to the next slide, please. That really is, sort of the overall framework. We talked about a lot of stuff, and we tried to sort of drill down into some specifics and some specific examples of how this stuff plays out in this relationship, and what to do about it, what to think through. Hopefully, as a group, talk about it, discuss these things as they come up. Be prepared, talk about it with staff, and learn. And that I definitely come back to that, just lifelong learning and sort of lifelong humility of trying to know that we don't know everything, and that we're still learning. It's a journey through that. So I do want to offer, we've got some time for Q&A. So please, I don't see any questions in the questions box just yet, but we have time to do that. So yeah, please, you could submit questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. So let's see, I will start pulling that up. And we can go through some, let's see, questions. Yeah, it says, Ariel relayed a few questions for self-reflection regarding cultural humility, and I was hoping you could repeat those or kind of focus on those for a bit, please.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I was actually definitely going to add those or send those over to Derek just to send us a follow-up. So we have a few self-reflection prompts on the topic of cultural humility. We have what parts of my identity am I aware of? What parts of my identity are privileged or marginalized? And Derek had some really great self-reflective questions as well, but how can you use these privileges to help others and navigate and change systems? How can you help others become more aware of their own privileges? How does my identity shift based on context and settings? And what parts onto which do people project? What parts are, what might be my own blind spots and biases? And Derek had, just as in relation to self-agency and choice, what would you do in situations with clients? So kind of answering that yourself first, and that would in a way, have you recognize what sort of biases you might have going into assisting a client with a decision.
Another one, the example that they said I gave was great. They like the detail. Do you have any other role play type questions that we can use in training? Yeah, that's great. I mean, I can think of a lot. So, and I appreciate that. So, that one with young adults, I strongly suggest. It really has come up a lot. It's not just a one-off. It has happened a number of times in my work. I would say one of the other ones that often comes up is what kind of job, or taking a job, and maybe especially around the shift, what time. So like often, not always certainly, but sometimes I've seen clients have to make a choice about whether they're going to work a third shift. They get paid more, so there is a benefit to it. So they have more money, but it may be, some of the risks are it could be really disruptive to sort of family time, working together when the kids go off to school, or who's taking the kids. You're sleeping at weird hours and all kinds of things like that. So it just takes thinking through. So that's one that I think about that has happened a lot. Certainly there are other ones like just, and again, I guess all of these tend to be job ones, but I don't mean it to be that. There are some other ones I can think of, but the other like job related one is a mom. This tends to be a gendered thing, although it doesn't necessarily have to be, but where a parent has to decide with young kids, do I go to work and find childcare and the cost of that childcare, versus do I stay home and take care of the kids but don't have the income? So that's always an important question. Another one is related to transportation. It's not the first time that I have heard from some clients that they just are adamant that they really need a car. They need a vehicle. They need to work towards that because they just can't, they do not like, for any number of reasons, public transportation. And it's really stressing them out, feeling uncomfortable on public transportation, feeling lost, and they just feel very strongly that they want to work to make sure that they have some kind of vehicle. That's been one. And again, you know, so lay out those possibilities, lay out those examples and say, you know, so what are the benefits on this side if you choose to work harder, get a second job? Here's all the stuff that you're going to have to do to get a license. Here's how long it's going to take to get a license, all that stuff. Totally understand your concern about public transportation, but here's what it actually looks like. And then, but here's public transportation, here's the cost, here's how easy it is, although here are all the other negative things clearly that you don't like about it, and all that kind of stuff. So kind of walking through those choices with someone. I'll rack my brain for some more examples, I'm sure, but I appreciate the question. Let's see. Oops. Okay, for clients who need jobs but are refusing all possible jobs. Yeah, that's an important one, and one definitely that has come up a lot of times. You know, thinking about that example. In the end, I know it is it's tempting to just say, no, you can't not have a job. You need to have a job, and just get frustrated and just tell them you're going to get a job. Here's what's going to happen. I know that's tempting to do, but what and you can very clearly say to yourself and like lay out those the possible consequences of the choice. If you don't get a job, how are you going to pay for your rent? How are you going to pay for the electric to stay on, right? You can say, you know, in America, we just don't have a safety net that is encompassing of housing, for example. You know, someone might qualify for Section 8 or HUD housing. Usually that is a longer process. That is not like immediate as soon as you get here. You know, so it's scary. And you can say, I mean, the consequences are you could be evicted from your house. If you don't pay your rent, you could be evicted. So what are you going to do when that? So I totally understand that, but that's a good one. That is a really important one to think through. And you might think to yourself, how can they make this decision? How can they possibly not understand that they need a job? But in the end, they need to make that decision, and they need to. The consequences will come. You need to prepare them for those consequences. But in the end, they need to make those decisions for themselves. Thank you for that question. Thank you. Yeah, thank you all. Yeah, and we have Ariel. Is there anything else that you'd like to kind of end on? No, we're almost at time, so I just wanted to give you an opportunity if there was anything else you wanted to kind of leave as a final thought.
And to thank those who attended. I think you know, your interest in attending webinars on this topic is definitely the first step in implementing you know, programs where you can, you know, talk more about self-reflection, especially with regard to volunteers and volunteer training. But yeah, just so thankful for all of you for being here. And thank you, Derek, for having me.
Thank you so much, Ariel. Yeah, thanks again, Ariel, for presenting. I won't thank myself. I'm just honored to be here and get to talk with you all and share. You know, I just wanted to thank everyone for attending today's Refugee Welcome Collective Lunch and Learn. If you have any other questions, please contact us at info@refugeewelcome.org. Once you leave today's webinar, you'll receive a follow-up email with a link to view a recording of today's webinar, as well as descriptions for more upcoming RWC Lunch and Learns. On behalf of Refugee Welcome Collective, thank you for joining us and have a great rest of your day.